Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Welcome to Die Hard on a Black, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is Last Man Standing.
It's Die Hard in a ghost town. Woo!
Wait, it's not. I thought it was Die Hard in a Tim Allen sitcom. Did I just spend 20 hours watching the wrong thing?
Wait, that's not what we were supposed God.
We kid because we love.
We love Tim Allen.
We are talking about the 1996 remake of the Kurosawa classic.
One of the great movies of the 20th century, made by the guy who made all the great movies of the 20th century. A remake by a not so shabby filmmaker named Walter Hill.
Let me just come in hot and heavy.
Come in hot and heavy.
Come in hot and heavy and say how much I love Walter Hill.
Philly special.
What are your favorite? Like, do you have a top three Walter Hill movies?
I don't know if I have a top three. I would have to go back and watch. What
springs to mind?
The Warriors springs to mind.
The Warriors,
I think that
for me, is top three. Yeah.
That's a great sort of like weird sci-fi-y, but also takes place. Also great New York City movie, in my opinion. Kind of strange. I'm always impressed that it's like based on the Iliad, right?
Yeah. It's based on I don't know if it's actually the Iliad. It could be.
It's inspired by the Spartans
Greek,
returning to Greece.
A Greek mythological story, yeah.
I like that one. Throw a few titles at me.
So his filmography is from memory, like big. He's really interesting because he started out as a screenwriter working with like Peckinpah. He wrote The Getaway, the original Getaway movie with Steve McQueen.
I like the original Getaway movie.
And then he did The Driver, which is sort of an interesting companion piece to this because it's kind of an existentialist, kind of minimalist piece.
Do you think Walter Hill's a little bit of a proto-man? Even though they're kind of operating somewhat concurrently.
And Mann even offered him heat, as we talked about.
Oh, that's right.
When Mann wanted to
that.
produce it.
Right.
So they're very much kind of aligned, and they kind of came up together, and they're interested in the same things in a slightly different way. I think Mann is a little bit more articulate as a filmmaker. I think Mann is more like maybe, I don't know if you would call Mann a maximalist, but I think Walter Hill is a minimalist.
Well, I think that not to get to who cares? So Michael Mann,
not to get pretentious on this show.
I was going to say that Michael Mann is.
That's what we do. Let's do it.
Michael Mann has this workaday director quality matched with this like hyper intellectualism.
Yes,
and I think Walter Hill, in a very great way, is much more matter of fact.
Yes.
So in other words.
That's a better way of putting it.
Well, in Mann's career, especially, I love the late style of Michael Mann because the themes become very like on the surface, like Black Hat and Public Enemies. They're sort of like, whereas I think Walter Hill tells a story and steps back a little bit. So Walter Hill feels like he's a storyteller, and Mann's first half of Mann's career is much up to Heat. I would say is much more like, here's the story in the movie, and then there's an icy intellectualism that comes into Mann's work later. That is not.
Yeah, I don't think Hill is interested in intellectualism much more. He's a much more visceral filmmaker. Yes. Mann is also a visceral filmmaker, but he's interested in both. I think Walter Hill is interested in telling the story in the most economical, concise, and hard-boiled way imaginable. For anyone that is unfamiliar, his greatest hits are after doing The Warriors, he was then involved, or around that time was doing Alien.
Yeah, he produced it,
and wrote it, co-wrote it with his longtime.
Can you imagine if he directed that?
David Giler, he almost did.
Yeah,
but I think he felt that he just wasn't as comfortable with the monster type stuff.
Yeah,
and he hasn't. his late career foray into science fiction, unfortunately, did kind of kill his career.
Called The Assignment?
To some extent. He did that movie afterwards, which was sort of, he did a couple of kind of gritty, kind of B-movie thrillers. But it was a movie with James Spader called Supernova that was a notorious sort of fiasco.
Yeah, right.
Which
I don't think I realized that was
fault.
Walter Hill.
It was not his fault. I think it was just one of those horrible torture productions where a lot of things worked against him. But, it's an absolute legend, a hero to me, and his other great movies include Southern Comfort, 48 Hours.
Oh my God, I forgot he did 48 Hours.
Which, is a top 3. Streets of Fire, which is amazing.
Yeah, that movie's having a Twitter assance because it was on Netflix, and I think it's screened at the American Cinematheque. It's like a musical,
awesome.
right?
It's I think it's Walter Hill's most personal film.
Okay.
And it's kind of all his, fetishes, if you like motorbikes, bikers, the 50s. If you're a real like Walter Hill sort of
Hillhead?
If you're a Hillhead,
yeah.
Like me, you kind of spot a lot of his signature flourishes.
Like obsessions, yeah.
Two of which are buses, which are in almost every film, including a bus chase in Red Heat, one of my other favorites.
Oh, I love Red Heat.
Through the streets of Chicago. Incredibly inventive sequence. But like 48 Hours has a sequence on a bus being chased, and the bus shows up. There's a long sequence in Streets of Fire where they're on a bus. So he has a weird thing with buses.
Right.
And also sex workers are in almost every single one of his films. His producing partner, David Giles, said that every film Walter has made is a Western.
Yeah.
Whether it's literally a Western or not. The WTF episode about where Walter Hill is on that show.
Oh, you know what? I'm sure I listened to
phenomenal.
that, but I can't remember it.
I've listened to it like 3 times because he kind of cut a swath through every major era of filmmaking, like from New Hollywood through to the sort of paradigm shift of the 80s.
He's still with us, yeah.
He is, yeah. He's from Long Beach and originally and. Total badass, like awesome filmmaker, awesome storyteller, awesome writer, as well. And I think this movie is actually really brilliantly written.
He's also, as we transition into talking about the movie, he's also clearly steeped in film history based on the credits of this movie, right? Based on the writing credits for this movie, which I feel like is a great time for our fast facts. Top line fact check.
So. Last Man Standing.
It's coming over the transom. The fast facts.
So Last Man Standing was released in the US by New Line Cinema on September 20th, 1996. It was produced and directed by Walter Hill, who also wrote the screenplay based on the 1961 film Yojimbo, directed by Akira Kurosawa, which in turn took its inspiration from the Dashiell Hammett stories, The Glass Key and Red Harvest.
Continental Up. The Continental Ops. I love those books. I'm a big Dashiell Hammett guy.
You're a Hammett head?
I'm a Hammett head. There's some of us are Hill heads, some of us are
You're
Hammett
one or
heads.
the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, actually, they're kind of
never
the same,
two will. No, they will meet.
Very hard-boiled writing, right?
Yeah. Continental. I mean, I would say from the Hammett that I've read, which is a lot, they're the most hard-boiled. Like the Continental Op doesn't have a name.
Yeah, I mean, I love this style.
Yeah,
I love hard-boiled fiction and hard-boiled.
We should say there's also a very famous remake of Yojimbo,
of course,
called A Fistful of Dollars,
which was not an official remake,
right?
And was therefore there were legal issues as a result. Yeah. This is a credited remake,
right?
So yeah, we're going to talk about that. I think when we get into the premise, I want to talk about Yojimbo and Fistful of Dollars. So Last Man Standing stars great cast: Bruce Willis, of course, Christopher Walken, Bruce Dern, William Sanderson, David Patrick Kelly, several others.
He is so good in this movie. He's amazing.
He's the shit in this.
Yeah, he's so good.
I mean, Walter Hill used him a lot.
Yeah.
Right, going back to The Warriors, where with his most quotable, famous
Warriors! We may have peaked on that one, guys.
Incredible. And also, he's got a great part in 48 Hours. He actually plays the character has the same name, Luther. So he was one of those kind of rep company guys.
Yeah,
you see
he
a lot
seems
of
like it.
Bruce Dern was in The Driver.
Bruce Dern is incredible in this movie.
He's great. There was a couple of other things I've watched him in recently, including The Driver, where he plays, which is an interesting companion piece to Heat. And
totally.
Because it's sort of about
and Drive,
and Drive, and Baby Driver, and many others. But it's a sort of about professionalism,
right?
The professionalism of the driver and the professionalism of Bruce Dern's character, who's the cop the detective trying to get the driver.
That's definitely Mannian.
Very much,
very Manny,
very much
man-esque.
So. But I think if you actually compare those two pictures, it does illustrate how they can take the same kind of material and thematics and do it in a completely different style.
Right.
And it is the sort of minimalist, not necessarily, maybe, and as I say, maybe maximalist isn't the right terminology, but the more expansive, more detailed, drown you in detail in the best possible way that Mann does, whereas Hill's instinct is the total opposite. Reduce
really
information
well said.
to the absolute minimum.
Yeah, it's like a Pinter play or a Mamet.
Yes.
Like Mamet probably has a little bit of in common with a Hill.
A lot of great, male writers, and another writer that I had the privilege of meeting and working with, James Salas, who wrote Drive.
Oh wow, yeah.
Is a genius at this, and his genius is his economy of language and being as poetic as possible with the fewest choice of words. It actually, literally reading James Salas's work improved like my skill set as a writer just by osmosis,
right?
Because he's not. That's not to pat myself on the back. That's to say that he's a genius.
He's literally patting himself on the back right now. Bill's going like this.
That's not to be self-aggrandizing. That's to say, literally, like the quality of someone else's brilliance. It makes you think a little differently about your own craft, right?
Right.
Anyway, so this movie, unfortunately, I was shocked at how big the budget is. 67 million was the estimated budget, and it grossed only 47.3.
I remember it being a little bit of like disappointment. It was kind of like, it kind of came and went. I didn't see it until home video.
Me neither. I saw it on home video, and I have to say, at the time, I was disappointed by it. I was too young, didn't get it, and it kind of, we'll get into this, I think, in the premise, but it's not the most accessible film, despite it's sold as a Bruce Willis action movie.
Right.
And it's actually not.
What do you mean?
I mean, it's actually an existentialist, meditative drama with flourishes of action, in my opinion. And I think if you tune into it on that level, it's great. But if you go in expecting, the problem with the film,
it was sold as an action movie.
Exactly. The poster, he's holding the two guns, very
iconic
John
shit,
Woo.
dude. Iconic
he
shit.
looks great in the period costumes.
I'm gonna just say it. This is the hottest Bruce Willis has been. That haircut. Oh my God.
That haircut has had a resurgence of late.
Yeah. But only certain men can pull that hair. And Bruno's one of them.
I mean, but I still am kind of confused as to how this film cost 67 million. I feel like this should be, if this was a $20-30 million movie.
What's the salary on Bruce in this movie? It
must have been pretty high.
10 million, I would guess.
At least post Die Hard with a Vengeance, which he was, which was a monster hit just the previous year. So, well, speaking of Bruce Willis and Die Hard with a Vengeance, shall we analyze this film's
Die Hard DNA?
So, yes, Die Hard DNA.
Do you think everyone likes the Die Hard DNA? I feel like no one's loved the it's a Jurassic Park reference for those of you playing at home.
I don't care whether people like it or not. We're committed.
Okay, yeah, you're right. We can't change course now.
We're 40 episodes in.
Yeah, you guys.
We double down on our cringe lord instincts.
Yeah, I'm going to say, Die Hard DNA.
Oh, that's right, the Total Recall.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to play with it.
Okay.
If you want to play jazz with it.
Yeah, no, I don't know about that. I think we just get through the episode. You know what I'm saying?
Moving on. So, Die Hard DNA, Bruce Willis in this film, of course, plays a gun-toting badass named John.
Oh, yeah, his name's John.
Who kills hordes of colorful bad guys in a relatively contained geographical location while enduring astonishing levels of physical punishment.
He gets the shit kicked out of him in this movie.
A little movie called Die Hard.
You know what's when he
still the cowboy, Mr. McClane. But this time, John Wayne doesn't walk off into the sunset with Grace Kelly.
It is interesting to think about him making
He's literally being, even though this isn't a Western per se, it's set in 1930 in Prohibition era.
Yeah.
I mean, again, to all intents and purposes, it is a Western.
Right.
Right. It is Bruce Willis playing the gunslinger, the Clint Eastwood type archetype. Right.
But it's also kind of a gangster picture.
Yeah. It's
so
kind
it's
of
got
an
a couple
interesting
things going
hybrid. He also, in terms of other Die Hard DNA, the character of John Smith, played by Bruce Willis, also refers to himself as a bum at one point, which is something that McClane does about himself. Like, she's the best thing that ever happened to a bum like me. You also have two lovers being interrupted mid-coitus by the sudden arrival of violent gunmen. You may recall that scene in Die Hard. It happens
Leslie
here
Mann,
a more graphic way.
Yeah, it's
here.
great. It's very good.
Quite bold. And it's a film that really like straddles Willis's like laconic tough guy action hero persona that was forged with Die Hard, with his attempts to find more artistically interesting material. I would say, right? With
We're
sort of mixed
12
results.
Monkeys here.
Yes. So he started to he's experimented. Pulp Fiction was
right.
I mean, everyone wanted to be in Pulp Fiction, post Reservoir Dogs and whatnot. It wasn't necessarily like an artistic risk, but it was somewhat of a risk to not be the lead role, which he wanted.
Right.
He wanted to play Vincent Vega. There's a whole story about this when Tarantino said, look, I've got John Travolta in mind for this, but I'd love to work with you. Read the script again, take a look at the character of Butch. And he did.
He's
and then,
great in Pulp Fiction.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's also an interesting...
It's also very good for the movie that he was in it, right?
Some people have the thing with that movie that the whole stuff with his girlfriend is like slows the movie down, but you have to have that to soften his character.
Yeah, totally.
I love all of that.
It's also
I love seeing the sweeter side of Bruce Willis.
And what's the title of the movie? Pulp Fiction. It's like that. The movie has multiple stories that intersect, right? Like that. I mean, I don't know. I think that's like a boring criticism of, and I think that movie's. That scene's good. I like that scene.
It's my number one movie, and I love all the detours in that movie. But anyway, let's dig into this movie in a bit more detail with our next section, Anatomy of an Action Movie, after this quick break.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
And we're back with Anatomy of an Action Movie, where we explore the tenets.
We live in a Twilight world.
You're doing the Walken.
I don't know.
Walken riff
there's
on
Walken's in this movie.
Yeah, it does kind of lend itself to that. With No Friends at Dusk. This is kind of a No Friends at Dusk.
This is a No Friends at Dusk movie.
Right. A lot of it is at that. That's kind of a weirdly. Anyway, that thought just occurred to me. So the premise of this movie is as follows. During the Prohibition era, mysterious gunslinger John Smith, Bruce Willis, rolls into the small, remote desert town of Jericho, Texas, where two rival bootlegging gangs have an uneasy and fragile truce. As Smith gets the lay of the land, he works both sides against the other in search of quick profit, until the conscience that he claims he doesn't have forces him to pick a side. So, as we talked about, this is a remake of an all-time
a movie
venerated,
playing in this room right now,
bulletproof,
called YOJIMBO,
classic. Here, my first question to you about this, and I have my own thoughts on it. But what do you think? Just putting YOJIMBO aside, because I want to talk about that separately. What's this film about? What do you think it's trying to say?
Well, I don't know. I think about this a lot because sometimes movies feel like they're saying what they mean to say, and sometimes they're saying something else. And I often think I gravitate towards what the movie is saying in spite of itself, like kind of like this.
Well, there's a classic example of that exact point with Walter Hill's Southern Comfort,
right?
Which he has repeatedly denied as a Vietnam allegory, right?
Yeah.
Just touching on that for a second, because I think it's a really interesting idea,
right?
Is, does the artist control the narrative of the interpretation of their film? And Walter Hill has made a film that illustrates this exact point, because Southern Comfort is about a group of National Guardsmen in Louisiana in the 70s who are a bunch of like gung-ho dickheads who fuck up and piss off the local Cajun community and just end up being completely outmatched in sort of enemy territory, as it were, and get picked off one by this sort of indigenous population. And Walter Hill had repeatedly said, the film is surface level. The film is what it is. To your point, it's not a Vietnam allegory, but it so clearly can be viewed as it. It raises a fascinating question about the nature of art and whether the artist themselves is allowed to control the meaning of the art that they create.
And they can't. I mean, that's just not reality, right? Like, you can have intention, of course, but like we live in an age where like,
but we live in a Twilight world.
We live in when there's no friends at dusk. But there's like there's a textual reading that you can make of any movie, right? Yeah. Like you mentioned Pulp Fiction. As a side note, my favorite Quentin Tarantino movie is Inglourious Bastards, because I think on one level it's a movie about revenge and what that does to you, but I also think that it's hard to view that movie released in like 2011.
I think 2009.
2009.
Yeah, thereabouts.
Outside of the American invasion of Iraq and the idea of like, what if America had sent illegal troops into Europe to terrorize Nazis in 1942 in the way that they do? Like, it's hard. There's an allegorical reading of Inglourious Bastards for me that makes the movie more intriguing to me than
if the artist never consciously intended it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, and Tarantino's smart and provocative and he knows what he's doing, but that movie is always read as like an interesting political statement in 2009 that might not be there, right? So the reason that I bring that up is because as watching this film, Last Man Standing, one of the thoughts that I had was like, this is the first quote unquote Western I've watched since watching Killers of the Flower Moon. The Scorsese, DiCaprio, kind of like, very fascinating movie, and that the book upon which it's based takes the perspective of the white FBI agent come to investigating the murders of the Native American community. And it's interesting to watch this movie as a movie about white ethnics from Chicago going to a border town, essentially, and like subjugating a Mexican woman, and like there's like this weird fusion there of like, this movie takes place in Texas.
Yeah.
So there are the Texans who are like these big city people, like these various stereotypes, and then you have like in the 30s especially the unwashed Italians and Irish,
right,
in sort of competition with one another. And into this situation comes like Bruce Willis, who's German American, like. So it's like this weird fusion of what America was as a frontiers town in the 1930s, but it's not really necessarily saying anything about any of that because, to connect it to YOJIMBO, one thing that YOJIMBO is about like how technology is changing and how the youth are affected by that. There's a great scene at the beginning of YOJIMBO when the son of a guy who lives in this town that Toshiro Mifune enters is like, I don't want to be a farmer. I want to get out of here. Like, I want to live fast and die young. And he's like, you can't live that way. And when you consider Japanese society as this like incredibly sort of homogenized culture, but in 1960, post Hiroshima and Nagasaki, young people in Japan were like killing themselves. They were like, we have no reason to live. There's no future for us. Like, and so it's interesting for the American spin on this to kind of be like, look at the white ethnics fighting each other.
But it's also set in the Great Depression,
right?
And not a million miles, not many years after World War I,
right?
Right, in a time of real economic hardship,
right?
Not prosperity at all.
Everyone's just fighting to survive.
Yeah,
but the emergence of organized crime,
right,
is a result of that kind of poverty and the immigrant experience of like, we can't make money in legitimate businesses. We're not, I mean, the Italians and the Irish especially, they couldn't get regular work. So they build up these kind of, gambling, protection, taking money from businesses for protection from a made up rival gang.
From themselves,
essentially. Yeah. There's a great line in this movie. I think it's Bruce Dern who's like, we can't have two gangs. One gang is the natural order of things. And you're like, huh. I don't know what this movie is about.
I have a couple of theories.
Yeah.
But the more we talk about it, the more I realize this movie is fucking great.
It's good.
It just needs to be understood. Don't go into, if you haven't seen this movie yet and you're intrigued.
First of all, you're 25 minutes into the episode, so good for you.
Yeah,
you're ill,
you do
but
you.
Yeah, yeah.
You do you.
Yeah, totally.
We're not here to judge. But I would say don't go into it viewing it as an action film per se. Go into it as I think this
a drama with action.
It's a drama with action. And, when we were on, we had the conversation relatively recently when we recorded this. It'll be somewhat of a distant memory from when this episode comes out. But when we were on 50 miles per hour talking about the greatest action movies of the 90s, we talked about this idea of what the definition of an action movie. And one of the terms was propulsion, that we talked about, a film that feels propulsive. And this is the antithesis
Yeah,
of
this
that.
is a pretty laconic, I think you said, movie.
Yeah, it's totally, it doesn't have a motor.
Right.
It doesn't have a drive. It doesn't have an urgency. It doesn't have a ticking clock. It's dark. It's oppressive. It's unwelcoming. But I think, my sort of theory is this is not by intention, this is not a realistic film, even though there is somewhat of extrapolating the things that you just talked about the era in terms of what was happening with certain ethnic groups. It's, by Walter Hill's own admission, like, he's going for something mythic, not for something realistic.
Kind of like the Warriors.
Okay? Kind of like the Warriors. It doesn't take place. It's like not quite in the real world. But I think it's much more of like elegiac. And my theory is that this place is purgatory. It's like hell's waiting room, this town. It's symbolic of a kind of, I mean, there's a subtle distinction between purgatory and limbo in spiritual.
What is the distinction? Look at you, you're cooking with gas.
I think it's dependent on different religions. I think purgatory is much more of a Judeo-Christian
That's when you're waiting for your, yes, that's
idea,
true.
and limbo is not necessarily attached to the Judeo-Christian belief system.
Okay.
And limbo is not necessarily pejorative, I think. I should have actually get the exact definitions, but just shooting from the hip here in the tradition of the movie.
Yeah.
I think this is more of a purgatory sort of state, because there are all of these essentially sort of damned souls. Bruce Willis, we don't know too much about his background, but there are a couple of comments that are like implied he's on the run from the feds.
But they never say for what.
They never explicitly say, but he's clearly got some kind of dark past. I mean, he's showing up with two guns. He's not selling ice cream.
Right.
What one can assume.
That would be a different movie.
Everybody there is almost everybody in the town. There's one or two people that seem relatively innocent, like the William Sanderson character, the barman.
I love William Sanderson.
I adore him. He's like a wonderful actor.
Yeah.
And the mechanic,
heart and soul of Blade Runner.
Yes. And I want to talk about him in more detail. But there's a couple of guys, and a lot of the women. Women often do get pretty brutalized in Walter Hill's movies, this film is no exception, but they're all trapped by circumstance. And the men are almost all, at best, amoral and at worst, immoral. So you essentially have
there's
a collection
not a lot of optimism.
They're in a nowhere state. It's sort of kind of America.
Right. Yeah.
But it's on the border. It's very hellish in its visual aesthetic. Orange, dust. Orange kind of filters, brown and kind of it's weird because it's actually quite a beautiful film, but it's a sort this is a paradox, but it's like beautiful and ugly at the same time somehow.
Right.
I think, this film.
Well, so I bring this. I'm looking on my phone right now because if I recall, there's a movie called Pale Rider.
Yes,
with Clint
1985.
Eastwood. Yeah, which I think is the one with the town, and he paints it red, right? Like
I haven't seen it, but I'm familiar with it, and I know the ending.
Essentially, he plays death in the movie, right? And you're never like, is this a real place? Is it not? And Eastwood kind of iterated on that idea for a lot of his career, right? And like the ghost town as some kind of purgatory, or even more, the ghost town as a sort of like non-place or a place for some kind of like, it can represent a lot of different things, right? It can represent purgatory. It can represent America. It can represent all these kind of different things. Like there's open space to interpret what this is about. And I think that like you're much more, it is not so socio-political as I'm reading it. I think it is much larger than that, right? And in the way it kind of like, it's more like how does the presence of this figure in this town cause everybody's behavior to change? You know, one thing that this movie owes a debt to YOJIMBO about is that in the very opening scene of Last Man Standing, Bruce Willis throws an empty liquor bottle in the air, and it goes in the direction of this town called Jericho. The name of the town is Jericho. The same thing happens in YOJIMBO. He throws a stick in the air, and he goes in the direction that it points. And, you know, similarly, YOJIMBO is about a amoral figure who eventually has to take a side, and the side he takes is of you know, a young family. He saves a young family, right? That's kind of his. But he's smarter than everybody there, and he plays them off each other. But I think that the tendencies in Last Man Standing are a little bit more Hollywood than they are in YOJIMBO for obvious reasons. You know, YOJIMBO has the greatest actor of the 20th century in it, Toshiro Mifune, in my opinion. One thing that's crucially different between Last Man Standing and YOJIMBO is Last Man Standing has a voiceover track.
Yes, yeah.
YOJIMBO does not. And so we're left with Mifune's amazing facial expressions. And he's both engaging and at a distance. I spent a lot of time YOJIMBO being like, what's this guy thinking?
What do you think, what's, in your opinion, I saw YOJIMBO last time I saw it was like a couple of years ago, but it's not super fresh in my mind. What do you feel like YOJIMBO is about thematically versus then what Last Man Standing might be about?
I mean, I think YOJIMBO is about, I mean, it's you know, it is, in my opinion, there's a pivotal character in the movie played that has a gun. And when the gun shows up in that movie, it's this big moment where suddenly they're not fighting with swords. This guy literally has a gun. So I've always read it a little bit about like the anxiety of change in a society, of technological movement forward. And also, again, this idea of like this helpless town being overtaken by criminals, like we're out of honor. Like the idea of like fighting honorably is gone. Right. It really feels a lot of Kurosawa's movies are made in the wake. I mean, you know, of the end of the war. Right. And Japanese society is rebuilding itself. And so these old traditions of
probably
honor,
analyzing itself to some extent.
Yeah, totally.
Well, analyzing its maybe national identity or its history.
Yeah, absolutely.
And its value system.
And also crucially, 1961 is comparatively late in Kurosawa's career. I mean, he started making movies in the 30s, and he's already made The Seven Samurai, which is by many people's opinion
also
like
remade several times.
Yeah.
You know.
And what's interesting is that at this moment, if I remember correctly of my reading, and I've read a lot of Kurosawa's has been, you know, an important filmmaker to me since I was 14 years old. I went and watched The Hidden Fortress because I was a Star Wars fan, and that kicked off this lifelong obsession. But at this point in Kurosawa's career, they're kind of like, okay, grandpa, like there's a lot of younger, angrier political filmmakers of this like generation that are lost, that are depressed, that don't know what their future is. Like this country had a fucking nuclear bomb dropped on it a few years before. So like, he's kind of like the old upstart. And I've always read YOJIMBO as kind of being this like character dropped into this situation where he doesn't understand exactly either side, but he knows that they are bad and they have to go. But over the course of the film, he gains this conscience and has to choose a side. And I've always felt like there's a little bit of Kurosawa thinking about like, what's my place in this society? Who am I? I feel like a stranger. Also fair to say that later on, Kurosawa attempted suicide.
Oh gosh.
So this guy has a complicated, state. And I mean, YOJIMBO, all of these films are exploring a changing Japan, but in a Shakespearean or a Brechtian sense, using history to explore the present moment.
It's interesting if you think about... I
don't think Last Man Standing is about that.
But I think it does, as you say, it sort of takes a biopsy of America at that time.
Right.
Of Irish immigrants, Italian immigrants, people like Bruce Willis that are maybe a non-specified, probably immigrant, perhaps Germanic, as you say.
Well,
or a generic kind of American figure. then you have there's references to Native Americans and also Mexicans because they're close to the border, and local Texans, etc., who are sort of coming out of the Western era. And we have an amazing character who's only in it for one scene, who's the Texas Ranger, who I want to talk about a bit later, who kind of embodies a different
that scene's
ethos.
Great.
That's the best scene in the film, in my opinion. But the last thing
the guy
I wanted
who
to
says
ask
one
you,
gang is the natural order.
Yeah, I've got the whole thing written down because I love that. That scene is phenomenal. The last thing I just want to ask you about is on this before we move on is something I've been trying to unpack is the allure of desert movies. We've kind of been talking about it a lot, and we talked about it with friend of ours, Travis Woods. We were talking about like desert noir and the revival of like red, southwestern noir.
Yeah,
I think he calls it rather bracingly like desert fuck noir.
Well, that's Travis for you. Hey, buddy, shout out to you.
Shout out to Travis. And shout out to his magazine that he's writing for, right? Noir City. Sounds,
I just want everyone to know I ordered my, or I was given as a gift a 4K of Chinatown. The pre-order's in.
Cool.
So.
But there's there's a cultural dialogue going on around this type of southwestern noir, desert noir stuff. There was a real proliferation of these movies in the 90s with movies. I reference one a lot called White Sands with Willem Dafoe and Mickey Rourke and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio and Samuel L. Jackson. That's set in I think it's New Mexico. U-Turn, which this is very similar to.
Yeah, U-Turn. I like U-Turn.
I love U-Turn.
Yeah, U-Turn's good.
That's set in Arizona.
I don't want to digress, but Oliver Stone, when he doesn't try to make the most ambitious movie ever, can make a real banger of a movie.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a great example of it. It's such a taut film, but it's very similar. It's like Sean Penn playing a character called Bobby Cooper, who is sort of a slightly immoral character, drifts into this town called Superior, Arizona, and unsettles things. And gets involved with the local woman, the femme fatale, played by Jennifer Lopez, and a lot of Walter Hill alums are in it, like Nick Nolte and Powers Booth. It's very Walter Hill adjacent, that movie. I'm just kind of and a lot of great movies end in the desert that are otherwise urban stories, like Seven and like Romeo is Bleeding, which I think is the most underrated movie of the 90s. Lethal Weapon.
I get very excited
There's
when I think
something about the American desert that's deeply symbolic and deeply powerful, and it is kind of a nowhere space.
Well, that's what so there's a great theater director who ran the Trinity Theater in Providence from Texas. I will get his name. Adrian, I gotta look this up. But he would always say, I grew up in Texas. And when you're from Texas, you have to fill Texas with your own thing. You have to fill that space. And so I've always wondered, and like, it is a container. It's a container for dread in Seven. It's a container for violence in Last Man Standing. In Lethal Weapon, it literally unmoors the characters, right? Like they kind of have to like drive into the middle of the desert and figure that out. Like it's sort of this new space. And I'll say that someone that like grew up on the East Coast, grew up among like, you know, as far as it goes, like classic American kind of like post, kind of like British or European structure, to move out to LA. I'm always like, where the fuck am I? Whenever I leave LA proper, because California gets like
we live in
weird.
A desert. It's just sort of a bit of a they live style facade. But I have this weird push pull thing with the desert.
Yeah,
that's like I'm fascinated by it and drawn to it, and at the same time, I'm kind of terrified by it.
Sure, well, it's scary. You know, you grew up in like you grew up like much more among people, probably to some extent. Even like I grew up in a small town. Yeah, but I grew up on the very densely populated east coast of this country. The UK has small villages, but they're like pretty close together, right? Yeah, America is about empty space.
Yes,
for better or for worse.
But I find it so. There's something so seductive about it, and maybe it's just because of the language of cinema and how it's shot. But
Absolutely. I mean, there's no more like photographed. I mean, more like America is the desert.
It's just filled with something maybe unknowable and mysterious and ancient as well. That it adds another dimension subconsciously to these stories. I think that's powerful. But let's move on and talk about the next tenet of the movie, which is the hero, Bruce Willis, as the character called John Smith. Where's this? Just any thoughts you have about this character, like his similarities to McClane, his differences, and
he's a lot more restrained. He doesn't have a sense of humor. This isn't my favorite Bruce Willis performance, but it's like a totally competent, good performance. And there's a moment.
He's well cast.
There's
in
a
this
moment
part.
where he's speaking to someone in a bar and he turns and looks away, and like, it's such an inhabited, lived-in moment that I think Bruce is just like, a lot of actors can't just be on camera. Bruce can just be.
He can
on
be
camera.
silent and be compelling.
Totally,
which is what a movie star as opposed to a
Which is why I wish this movie had no.
Do.
I wish this movie had no voiceover.
But the voiceover is interesting because I actually think I'm a voiceover apologist. I always made the argument that there's a general theory around Hollywood that like a voiceover only exists in movies that are broken, and there's so many like AFI top 100.
That's a development person's note.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Apocalypse Now has voiceover.
Blade
Clockwork
Runner.
Orange has voiceover. Sunset Boulevard, right? Like you could go on and on. Forrest Gump was an Oscar-winning. No, that's not necessarily the most
fashionable
movie now, but it was an Oscar-winning monster box office hit.
Right.
There's tons and tons of examples. Doesn't Dune have voiceover in it? It's
probably, right? Like, It's the opening does.
Basically, I think it's a little bit of a fallacy that a film that uses voiceover is automatically trying to fix the narrative or something's broken. I mean, that kind of was the case in the original 82 cut of Blade Runner, which this film's kind of similar to in some ways, and even has the William Sanderson connection. But I actually think the voiceover is brilliantly written. I think because I would watch sometimes with the subtitles. These are real.
I only watch with subtitle.
Hard-boiled nuggets. Of great dialogue, even though it's a sort of internal dialogue. So it's interesting. I think Bruce Willis's voice and style lends itself quite well to that hard boiled, and it goes back to the traditions of film noir, which this is also kind of adjacent to.
Totally,
he's a cool character, but he's also a bit of an enigma by intention, right? So we don't know too much about him. But this does take place at an interesting moment on again the sort of metaphor of the crossroads of Willis on his artistic journey. He's established himself now. This is 8 years after Die Hard.
Right.
He is one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood. He is a pretty bulletproof, bankable movie star. He has survived some gigantic flops like Bonfire of the Vanities and Hudson Hawk, and continues to be like at the top of his game in this era. And is kind of mix and matching, I think probably a little bit of like one for them, one for me.
Right.
At this point, he'll be doing his more sort of elevated programmer type stuff. Like he'll go on to do films like Mercury Rising and things that are very much an extrapolation of the McClane template.
Right.
And then he'll go off and do something like we talked about with Sean Fennessy on the Striking Distance episode, these kind of esoteric artistic choices like the Alan Rudolph collaborations with like Breakfast of Champions or Kurt Vonnegut. He was a big bookworm, Bruce Willis.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
Yeah, so he was was interested in stuff that you just wouldn't expect, So it's a cool character. Let's talk about the villain.
Sure.
And there's a few, but the most vivid has to be Christopher Walken as Hickey.
Can I be honest? I think this is a nothing part. I think Bruce Willis is fine. Christopher Walken is fine, but like it's almost forgettable when he's on screen. Like I just was so like blah.
Yeah.
Like what are we doing? Like it's almost not worth really a ton of ink spilt on it because I'm kind of like, okay, yeah. David Patrick Kelly is far more impressive.
I agree. I actually think that David Patrick Kelly. Well, let's talk about him as Doyle, who's the leader of the Irish mob.
First of all, I'm very pro the Irish mob. That's just my vibe. Yeah.
He's fantastic.
Yeah, he's very good.
And it's interesting that it would almost feel the more obvious thing, wouldn't it have been, to cast David Patrick Kelly as Hickey?
Yeah,
and Walken as Doyle, and yet they don't do that, which makes it interesting, but maybe like kind of a bit strange, really, because
there's also all this setup of Hickey, and
Hickey doesn't even show up until halfway through the movie.
It's Christopher Walken, who's great, but like much more into Christopher Walken in Nick of Time, for example, than I am in this movie.
I agree. He's a little bit sort of he kind of stays in second gear, really.
Yeah, I agree.
For most of the movie, and he's obviously Christopher
Patrick
Walken.
Kelly is working as
and he's dimensionalizing the character with the relationship with the woman.
Then he has that line where he's like, she only had one dress before I met her. Like
he's genuinely in his twisted way.
Yeah.
He's genuinely in love with her. And genuinely thinks, albeit again in a very twisted way, that he is benevolent towards her. He's actually not.
Again, shades of Ernest in Killers of the Flower Moon. This like weirdly conflicted piece of shit. Like they're pieces of shit. They're horrible people, but they get an interiority that I don't know if they earn. But David Patrick Kelly is really.
I mean,
good
and he doesn't usually get to play a dimension, a character that has more than one dimension.
Right.
He tends to just be a super aggressive prick.
Yeah.
Whether it's Commando or 48 Hours or The Warriors, and he's amazing at it. But he's a way better actor.
Oh, I forgot he was in Commando. Of course,
he's got that, and he's such a scumbag in that. He's horrible.
Yeah, he is
horrible in that, and meets an appropriate demise. But yeah, I actually think this is kind of David Patrick Kelly's movie.
I would agree, and Bruce Willis kind of gets out of his way.
Yeah,
yeah,
and there's a great ensemble and many other great actors. Moving on to the action. The action's generally very good, as in all Walter Hill films.
Yeah.
I mean, he shoots the shit out of a shootout.
Yeah,
he really
good.
knows how to stage and shoot action.
Yeah, he does.
Were there any moments that you particularly
Every time
enjoyed?
Bruce Willis pulls out a gun, it's Liam special. It's the double handgun stuff is great. The fact that he never seems to run out of bullets except at very opportune moments is extremely I like that. Like, because this is not a realistic movie. That's the thing. Yeah. So I want to say the one sort of note that I have is that this movie takes too long. Similar to YOJIMBO, for the first hour and a half, you're like, something bad has to happen to this guy. And then finally, when it does, it's really, really great because he seems almost invulnerable until they just beat the ever-living
And there's actually
shit
one
out of him.
brilliant moment. I think it's the scene where he's in the bath, which obviously you couldn't be in a more vulnerable physically situation. And they burst in on him when he's in the bath.
And he goes for the gun.
Well, there's one bit where Bruce Willis does a look. And again, to your point about how brilliant he was as a silent actor, and you really, it's the first time you see him look genuinely scared. And Walken even says to him, like, are you scared? And he didn't even need to say that because Willis is such a brilliant, actually an incredibly subtle actor when he wants to be.
Yeah, totally.
That he's
really subtle in Pulp Fiction, to come back to it. He's great.
And 12 Monkeys and many other films that we've talked about were Unbreakable and whatnot. But the action in this movie is rock solid. It doesn't have the pacing and the vibes of an action film. But when the action kicks in, it's robust, and potent.
Yeah.
Not much humor in this film, so not really worth talking about that. I think we can put on our 1930s tailored suits.
God, I want one.
And mosey on over to the Die Hard Oscars.
I lived in a different time for menswear because I really love the vest and suit.
The 60s was more my...
Yeah. 60s.
My era. Although, who am I kidding? I'm a Miami Vice, a 1985 guy.
You contain multitudes when it comes to fashion.
I contain multitudes.
You have a nice polo button
all
down.
bad.
I don't think that's true at all. Let's do it.
Let's head to the Oscars and get our first award going, which is the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line. And as I said, I think Walter Hill is a deceptively and brilliant writer. It doesn't get too much credit. He's also, as we said, he's also a producer, but he's thought of mainly as a director, but he started as a screenwriter. And he's a brilliant writer.
Give me the lines. Let's do it.
Here are the 5 I picked. The first one is the opening voiceover that begins the movie, I think. No matter how low you sink, there's still a right and wrong. You always end up choosing. You go one way so you can try to live with yourself. You go the other, you'll still be walking around, but you're dead and you don't even know it. And that's John Smith's opening voiceover, which is kind of the thesis statement of the piece.
Can I give you my favorite line from YOJIMBO, which relates to that? This is my favorite line from YOJIMBO. Listen, old man, I get paid for killing, and this town is full of men who deserve to die.
Yeah, there's similar echoes to this, isn't there? He says things like, everybody here will be better off dead, or things like that.
I just think that that's an incredible piece of hard-boiled dialogue, and it's just amazing.
Then there's the line, this is an exchange, but this was very die-hardy, I thought. This was like classic, almost Last Boy Scout-esque Willis. Joe Monday, the William Sanderson character, says to him, last I heard, you were going to have a talk with some fellas. Next thing I hear, one of them's dead. And he responds, conversation kind of went downhill. It's such a Willis. And then sips a drink.
That's a good one. He drinks a lot in this movie.
What, you think the meek will inherit the earth? If they do, you won't be there to enjoy it.
That's a great line.
That's Doyle to Smith.
Yeah, I remember that.
Fucking David Patrick Kelly.
I think
crushing.
that's it.
But hold the phone. There's 2 more that I think are even better. And I know these are a little longer, but because I want to talk about this scene and this character, Captain Tom Pickett.
Right.
The Texas Ranger. He says, I'm coming back here in about 10 days. I'm going to bring about 20 Rangers with me. I will tolerate one gang because that's the nature of things. A certain amount of corruption is inevitable. But if I find 2 gangs here when I get back, then in a couple of hours, there will be no gangs here.
Right.
Like that scene is the best scene in the film. And although I need to pull up the name of the actor because he's
that might be
from Scrubs is one of his most famous parts.
That also feels like a distillation of America. Like one gang's okay.
Well, the whole idea of accepting corruption.
Yeah.
But he also that scene you could unpack for ages. There's so much complexity in it. But even though that's a brilliant performance by that actor, I need to pull up his name. I couldn't help but wish Sam Elliott was playing that part.
Oh yeah, that would have been good. That would have been good.
Just to come in and crush. But he's amazing in it.
Let me get that gentleman's name while you. I'm gonna go. Is there one more?
Done a lot of great work. There's one more line that was also probably my winner.
Okay, what's that?
So at the end of the movie, where Walken as Hickey confronts Bruce Willis, and Willis has basically got the drop on him, but Walken has a kind of tricksy move that he pulls where he pretends to be unarmed, and then pulls a gun. And Walken says to him, "I don't want to die in Texas. Chicago, maybe. You can meet me there if you want. Try and kill me." I love this idea of like a character saying, "I don't want to die in this specific place."
It's great. Well,
that is that was just so poetic to me.
Yeah.
It's something to kind of think about. Like that, it will be, where you end up. That becomes, it tells your life story to some extent. Like where you were born and where you died kind of tells a little story. And I think that that's something quite beautiful and powerful. Of course, it's actually deceitful because he ends up pulling a gun on him, but it also felt kind of truthful. Like, I don't want to die in Texas.
That's Walken's best moment.
I want to die
in
Chicago.
Yeah, totally.
I love that.
I don't want to die in Texas either.
That's my pick for the Oscar.
I'm going to go with that. And then I'm also going to tell you the actor's name is Ken Jenkins.
Thank you. Wonderful performance.
He's very good. Yeah.
So good in it. The Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. A lot of nominees.
Okay.
William Sanderson as the innkeeper Joe Munday. David Patrick Kelly as Doyle, the leader of the Irish mob. Michael Imperioli, who we haven't really talked about, as Giorgio Carmonte, the senior figure in the Italian mob in one of his earlier parts. Leslie Mann as the chatty sex worker called Wanda. And Ken Jenkins, I did have it written down, should have saved you some time, as Captain Tom Pickett, the Texas Ranger sent to straighten things out.
I'm going to go with Ken Jenkins because that scene is really good. I think it's great. Everyone's good. William Sanderson's great, but if we were doing Blade Runner, I'd give it to William Sanderson. But
William Sanderson also amazing in this movie called Black Moon Rising. That was a John Carpenter script starring Tommy Lee Jones. And Linda Hamilton. It's kind of a weird.
I don't know.
And you're
this
a guy,
movie.
Nick Cassavetes.
Are you kidding me? Black Moon.
Get
Rising?
on it.
I gotta get on it.
It's
Do you
very.
have the 4K? Can I borrow it?
It's a Corman movie. I don't have the 4K. It's a New World Pictures.
Oh, okay.
Corman.
Okay.
So it's like kind of like a scuzzy little cult film, but it's really cool, and he's great in that.
Okay, I'll check it out.
The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie, 3 nominations.
Okay.
Patrick Kilpatrick as Finn. The Doyle's enforcer who messes up Smith's car immediately upon arrival.
Oh, yeah, fuck that dude.
But
he gets it. That motherfucker gets it.
Bruce Dern as the inept and corrupt Sheriff Ed Galt.
That's a great name for a character, Ed Galt.
And Ned Eisenberg as Fredo Strozzi, the leader of the Italian mob.
Yeah, it's Ned Eisenberg because I fucking hate that. Also a pro-Irish over here, but I just kidding. That stuff's a nightmare.
I think he's miscast.
Yeah,
I think he's really
good.
miscast. He's good. It's a good performance, and he plays a guy who's like doesn't feel. I think it's almost maybe intentionally someone that doesn't feel that intimidating.
Yeah.
You know, imagine if it was like Gandolfini in that part. Right, say for example, and suddenly you're like, oh, shit!
He would just
you're
steal all the
formidable.
Oxygen.
You know, and that might be the same thing why you don't have someone like Sam Elliott in that part with it because they're too dominant.
They're too
dominant.
Nick
Nolte playing the Ranger, or Powers Booth playing the Ranger.
Well, you have to remember it's also Willis, and you have to. Willis is not like a guy who like can't. He can get the shit. He's not vain, but like he also needs to be the toughest.
He needs to be, exactly. So there's a balancing act with the casting around that central star. I think Bruce Dern, like his character, sucks in this movie, so I'd give it to him.
Yeah, okay.
Best death is
Number table. Next time you have a chance to kill someone, don't Hesitate. That was a robot.
He's
Not
back
sure
with a
why.
vengeance.
Yeah.
So we've
Simple
got
Simon.
the best. We just referenced it. Bruce blowing away that character of Finn with 2 guns, which is the first guy he kills. That he like blows him out, and he falls out like over 360 degrees.
Great shot.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Because it looks like that doesn't look like a dummy.
No, it's good.
It's really
amazing.
wild.
I rewound it.
That's one of the most amazing flourishes of action. Brutal violence, but really effective. Bruce killing the guys while mid-coitus.
Been there.
Die Hard.
Yeah, been there.
It's happened to us all.
Yeah, you know.
And then finally, Bruce outwitting and killing Walken in the finale.
It's got to be that. Even though that first kill, and no, I'm going to go with the first kill.
I agree.
Yeah.
That is because it's
also
one of the
a
most
tone setter.
It is. It says this is a little outside of reality. This is a little John Woo like in that it's not supposed to be totally naturalistic or realistic.
Yeah, that's a good.
It's a little hyper stylized. Well, we will head into our final section of the show, the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz, after this quick break. And we're back with the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz.
How was your break?
Where the scores can really change. It's great. I had a whiskey. I saw a show. I'm going for some kind of Western motif. It's going nowhere. Let's move on.
Okay. I ate pasta.
How was yours?
That's very good.
Okay, good. All right, question number 1.
That pasta does look good. I'm hungry. Go ahead. Mm.
In which previous 90s film does Christopher Walken play a close friend of Bruce Willis's dad?
Pulp Fiction.
Is correct.
He took the watch, put it up his ass.
Kind of funny to think that they were both in that movie, but they never shared screen time.
Right. Their characters did, but they don't.
Question number 2. Tahiti-born actress Karina Lombard plays the role of Felina, Doyle's reluctant mistress in the Irish Mob.
I did a Wikipedia deep dive on this person, so I'm excited to see if I get it.
Doyle's reluctant mistress in the Irish Mob, in which 1993 thriller does Lombard seduce Tom Cruise under the direction of the Memphis Mob?
The Firm.
Is correct.
Good
You're
movie.
going for a clean sweep. Okay.
Very long
This is a tough
movie.
one. The Firm is long, but it's like, I could watch 10 hours of it.
Interesting.
I could watch 10 hours of Sidney Pollack directing a Paramount movie from 1993 with that cast.
Yeah.
Strathern, Ed Harris, Holly Hunter, Gary Busey. Like,
you're right.
Give me 10 hours of this.
Yeah, you're right. Busey, I forgot was in that.
Goddamn Christmas! Make it longer.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. Now, this is a bit tougher.
The first assistant director.
No.
Yeah.
It's a good one. I'm proud of this. It's convoluted corner.
Corner.
In Last Man Standing, hard-faced character actor R.D. Call plays the role of McCool, Doyle's right-hand man in the Irish Mob.
Yeah.
In which 1990 New York gangster film does R.D. Call play Ed Harris's right-hand man in another Irish mob?
Ed Harris, Irish mob. Give me the call Al.
We're calling Al?
Yeah, we're
getting him
calling
on the blower. Okay. All right, we're phoning a friend. The clue is the film stars Sean Penn, Gary Oldman, and Robin Wright, and was directed by frequent U2 collaborator Phil Jones.
Heaven's Creatures. But that's a Phil Jono movie. But
you're thinking of Heaven's Prisoners.
Heaven's Prisoners, which is not the movie with Alec Baldwin, but Phil Jono directed that. What is the name of this movie?
This movie is called State of Grace.
Oh, God damn it. Yeah.
Have you seen it?
No, I've never seen State of Grace, but I know
it's
about
a Billiam special.
It's a
Billiam special. Like, you will love... Shout out. This movie is one of the most slept on, incredible gangster films from this era. 3 phenomenal central performances from Penn, Oldman, and Ed Harris. It is superb, and it has the most amazing shootout at the end. Okay. So highly, that's another recommendation for you guys. That about does it. But we have a couple of plugs that as we're speaking of violent gangster films set in the 1930s that have some potentially wider thematic ideas. We are about to appear, if everything holds, and bear in mind, schedule-wise, we record these sometimes out of order and ahead of time, but if everything, with a little energon and a lot of luck, we will be on
Cows in the Field.
Cows in the Field.
Whose podcast about movies and philosophy, discussing Michael Mann's Public Enemies. I don't know if Public Enemies is a masterpiece, but it's a movie I love and think is thematically dense and rich. And that is my Heady Man is my favorite man. So I'm very excited.
I can't wait. And it's a great companion piece to this film. So it was kind of funny how the scheduling worked out. I'm told that's going to come out on June 28th, to be confirmed, but that's counting the field.
Justin, get it together.
A great show. You've been on it before, talking about Starship Troopers.
It's one of my favorite podcasts. Great.
It's awesome. So we're excited to dig into that.
Unless it doesn't work out.
And then we have one last plug, which is a friend of the show, Sean O'Connell, wrote a book about Bruce Willis.
Oh, yeah.
That is has just come out. It's this is the
blurb.
The blurb about it. Bruce Willis's career is the subject of Sean O'Connell's latest book, a definitive survey of Willis, the actor, the cultural icon, and the man. O'Connell compiles exclusive original interviews with directors who've worked with Willis, as well as film critics and journalists who have analyzed his career, into a celebratory compendium that is being called excellent, beautiful, and comes highly recommended. O'Connell fills the book with in-depth analysis of Willis's films, his career arc, and the industry that made him a star. And it includes capsule reviews of every Bruce film.
That is
making
great.
This a complete handbook to a true American original. And I thought it might be nice just to read a capsule review of Last Man Standing to cap this off, because I read it. It's really impressive work, because he's done every film from Blind Date to the sort of late era direct-to-video stuff. And done
the more
a little
recent stuff.
As well as obviously the litany of classics, but it's a fully comprehensive thing. And they reminded me of the little Leonard Maltin, like bite-sized reviews.
Oh, I like those.
So his review of Last Man Standing, to give you a sense of his style, is: Walter Hill remakes Akira Kurosawa's samurai drama YOJIMBO into a tougher-than-leather border-town gangster picture that fits Willis like a glove. The story doesn't reinvent the wheel. A stoic stranger rolls into a ghost town, encounters warring criminal groups and a crooked sheriff, and decides to earn money cleaning up the scorched and blood-soaked streets. But the formidable Willis proves that his rugged demeanor, ice-cold confidence, and resilient heroism enhance the genre's run-of-the-mill elements, making me wonder why he didn't try to do more westerns or period gangster movies over the course of his career. He gives it 3 out of 4 stars.
That's a reasonable review.
Very fair.
I'm excited to read this book. Sean sent us a copy. I have not had a chance to dig in, but I'm excited.
I'm looking forward to reading it too. It's called Bruce Willis, Celebrating the Cinematic Legacy of an Unbreakable Hollywood Icon. It comes out June 11th. That does it for today, unless you have any other plugs.
No, I think that's it. We're on the Twitter. Let me let Gilliam G. Billingham. Phil's on the board of X. Excuse me. Sorry, I don't mean to offend you by calling it
Call it X, or I'll sue you.
Oh, boy.
I'll sue you into the Stone Age.
I'm going to get my Cybertruck just right through the window.
Let's race our Cybertrucks through the desert.
Paul Verhoeven was right. That's it. Next time on the podcast,
it's Star Trek First Contact.
Oh, that's right. Resistance is futile.
So join us for that.
We'll be back next time with a hot board queen. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.
Back-to-school savings are officially in session at Tanger Outlets. Shop tax-free August 2nd through 6th and save up to 70% off the latest school styles. The best of apparel, footwear, accessories, and more. Save at Nike Factory Store, American Eagle, Gap Outlet, Crocs, Under Armour, Banana Republic Factory, and hundreds more. There's always something happening. Discover the latest fun and events all season long. Tanger Outlets, your savings destination.